Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's CanConnect19 event. My name is Garrett, and I would like to thank each and every one of you for joining us this evening. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to briefly share who we are at CanConnect19. So, our purpose is to bring COVID vaccine injured Canadians and those living with long COVID together in a caring and informed environment. We exist to support peer connection, access to knowledge, and a sense of community for people who have often felt dismissed or unsupported elsewhere. We're also very pleased to share that vaccine injured Canadians and those living with long COVID can now join our Circle platform for free by completing a detailed application. So the application link will be shared in the chat a little bit later tonight. If you would like to stay engaged between events, also please follow us on Facebook so you can find us just by searching CanConnect19, all one word. Tonight, we're honored to welcome our presenter, natural health practitioner Joanne Mulhall. So, Joanne has been a practitioner since 1997. Her journey began in her early 30s when she experienced unresolved digestive and energy issues that were not improving through conventional approaches. Exploring more holistic modalities led her to meaningful improvement and healing. Since then, she has specialized in eye and hair analysis, and she is at level 2 Reiki practitioner. Joanne believes that healing includes both the physical and the energetic, and she incorporates both in her work. She is taught with the Institute for Holistic Nutrition in Vancouver, as well as through CanFit Pro in Toronto. Her work with women transitioning through menopause is a significant part of her practice, and she is also a valued contributor to the CanConnect 19 community. So tonight's session is titled Understanding Stress and Building Resilience. So, stress is one of the most significant barriers to good health, yet it is often underestimated in conventional care. From a holistic lens, stress includes the physical, emotional, and psychological pressures that we carry throughout our lives, and these directly influence hormones, the nervous system, and overall well being. Joanne will share how the stress response works, how chronic stress affects the system, how to identify personal stress triggers, and practical strategies to build resilience and restore balance. So, with that, please join me in welcoming our speaker for this evening, Joanne. So, over to you.
Thanks, Garrett. Honored to be here, everyone, and thank you all for taking the time to be on this presentation. We strive to disseminate up-to-date and accurate information on a regular basis. We do it at no cost to you because education is empowerment. So we're really happy to see as many people as have showed up tonight. So I'll just share my screen here and get started. As Garrett mentioned in the introduction, you know, it's such. I mean, we use the word stress almost every day in our language. You know, how are you doing? Oh, I'm stressed. And oh, what's happening? Oh, I've got this stressful thing going on. And it's one topic that really needs a deeper dive, and that's what we're attempting to do tonight here. Although even in a 50-minute to an hour presentation, it's not as deep as we could go. So I'm going to do my best to kind of get us through some good solid foundations of information here. And we'll just see there we go. So one thing I wanted to outline, hold on, there we go, is these three terms, stress, pressure, and anxiety, are often interchanged in our vocabulary. We do use them a lot in trying to describe what we're experiencing, what we're feeling. It is the body's natural response to these challenges, that we would have in our life. And also it really is, and this will come up more than once in our talk tonight, it's the way that we react to stress that actually causes us the pleasure or the pain. For the most part, I mean, there are still circumstances where it's super impactful, and we'll talk about those. But keep in mind this simple outline that I actually got from Jack Canfield, probably 20 some years ago when I did his Success Principles program, which was E plus R equals O. The event plus the response equals the outcome. And the only main thing that we have impact over is the response. For the most part, there can be certain things with the event, but in terms of outcome, it's really about our response to a situation, to an event, to a person, that we can regulate our nervous system and mitigate that stressful potential outcome. Also, we need to recognize that stress is not always a negative thing. Effects of stress can be positive or negative. And positive stress or eustress can be a motivator. Negative stress is the one that we're going to be talking a little bit more about here, which can be destructive and disease promoting. So let's just talk a little bit about the positives first. So positive stress, which is called eustress. Dr. Hans Selye from the University of Montreal, who researched this topic quite a bit, he was the one that coined the term eustress. And it's really looked at as a motivator for improving lifestyle, in talking about like a growth mindset, right? Looking at it as an empowerment type of thing. It provides the experience of pleasure, and it does add meaning to life and initiates, as I said, emotional growth. So examples of this would be possibly a graduation, a marriage, a birth of a baby, beginning a new relationship, a job or a career. These can all have certain amounts of stress attached to it, or pressure or anxiety, but they also put us into a mode where we are kind of on, our brain is a little bit turned on, we're, feel like we can be on the top of our game. I'll just use my own example. Preparing this presentation on stress actually made me a little bit stressed, because I was explaining earlier, I was having technical kind of like, formatting issues with my slides and things that didn't work properly. And, I'm practicing my own techniques of just, it's okay, it's going to be fine. Like, I'm breathing through it. But obviously the positive was I've given this talk many, many times, many iterations over 20 some years, but to revamp it and give it a fresh look actually, stretched me, and I enjoyed doing it, and I learned a few new things. And, it was overall, it was a life affirming experience. So those are the ways that we can look at positive stress experiences. And so the physical improvements are that we get energy, we get some stamina, we get a feeling of, oh, I can do this. It's good to have a little bit of those butterfly nerves, because it does kind of make you feel like, okay, yeah, I have to, work with this. I have to go with it. It can improve overall body function. It can spawn creativity. It can instigate more intellect. It can help with goal orientation, overall motivation, and the emotional improvements can make you feel like you have a little bit more, control or management over your life. It can create positive moods. It can create positive relationships, and it can also have experience healthy. There's a word on my screen there that now is blocked out that I can't read. Healthy experiences. So I just want to break this down a little bit more, because I think it's important if you're going to look at the topic of stress and you're going to apply this to your own life, it is helpful to really start to break it down and delineate a little bit better, how this can work. So when we talk about stress, generally the focus is a present, right now thing. The trigger is a real demand or change on the system. We can be energized or tense from it, the typical feeling. And is it helpful? Sometimes. Again, we're going to talk more about the sometimes. Pressure is looked at, the focus is sort of on an outcome. You're pressured to do, you have a project, you have a hard deadline on a date, on a project date. The trigger is usually expectations that you have put on yourself or someone else has put on you. And you typically feel that it's urgent because there is this deadline attached to it in some cases. And it can feel like a burden. So I can relate and say, yes, anytime I get ready for a presentation or something, I can feel a little bit of pressure because I have a timeline and I have a specific outcome and it's urgent and I've got expectations of myself. How do I want the presentation to look? How do I want it to flow? How do I want it to sound, right? So is it helpful? Yes, when it's in balance, right? And so the other one, anxiety, which a lot of people experience anxiety, usually focused on the future. And it's usually around an uncertainty or a fear. And one thing I didn't put in here was the acronym for fear, which is false expectation appearing real. Okay, which is you're thinking about something, it hasn't happened yet, and you start spinny brain about, whoa, this could happen and that could happen and this could happen. And yeah, it's not like stay in the present, it's not happened yet. And the typical feeling of that would be worry and dread. Oh, what if, what if, what if? And if it's really not helpful. I would, categorized as only a little, but in some realms, I would say it's not actually very helpful at all. So stress is a reaction, pressure is an expectation, and anxiety is usually a future forward type of fear. So I hope that helps to break that down a little bit more. So what is stress? Stress is the response to a challenge in the present. It's a physical, psychological response to a real or perceived real, because we know that when we wake up from a dream and we've like, oh my God, this happened in my dream and I was running and this was so stressful. A perceived real demand, threat, or change. So there's a trigger, there's a physical and mental response of activation, a focus to act. Okay, so there's usually something that's requiring you to make an action or a decision right in that moment. Can be helpful short term. This is where acute stress response is what we need. You're driving down the highway, somebody cuts you off, you have an instantaneous reaction to go over to the shoulder of the road, and you're able to safely, your mind clicks in, you're able to safely pull over. My husband always tells me that I'm the one that's best in a really a medical emergency type of situation, because I've done a lot of that type of training with ski patrol and first response. And years ago in a previous life, I was a flight attendant. I had to do all that emergency training. And, that type of thing kicks in very fast. I feel very calm. It's something that you can follow through on and get to the other side and know that you kind of laid out a map of how you're supposed to react. And that can be super helpful because it can save your life, or you do get something done. And obviously, there are circumstances to that when something else doesn't happen and this stress response continues. So there's 4 categories of the stress response. And so the thing that I learned when researching this topic was I'd heard about the fawn not being labeled as the fawn response, but I learned a new definition and actually calling it what it is. So the fight obviously is responding to the threat by aggressively confronting or standing up to it. We often use that example of the T-Rex, who's threatening you, or like I said, the traffic, somebody cutting you off, or, a bar brawl or something like that. Someone's being aggressive to you in a street, or you're out walking. The flight, this would be the opposite. It's the same kind of physical reactions, but you need to escape or you need to get away in order to avoid the danger. So you have to physically remove yourself from the situation. When you freeze, and you'll see in a chart that I did in a couple of slides, you become immobile and unable to act when faced with this threat. They often call that the deer in the headlights. And the fawn is someone who's trying to please or appease the threat to avoid conflict or harm, where the person feels powerless. And often this type of response happens in abusive situations or things where there's long-term chronic stressors, exterior stressors, and you need to be able to do whatever you can to bring the level of the stress down, or the level of the threat down. So these are all types of trauma responses and the stress responses that occur when the brain perceives a threat. So again, it can happen in a situation, and when we talk about PTSD, when you relive a situation. And Scott, who did one of our health talks there a few months ago, he talked about chronic stress disorder, which is often what a lot of people are experiencing. It's not post-traumatic, it's chronic traumatic, because the repeating issue is not subsiding. Instead of something being relived, it's actually continuing on. So, and again, as I mentioned, in our dreams, we can perceive things as to be 100% real. I've actually experienced that freeze state, maybe you can relate to this, in a dream where I felt like there's been some kind of threat, and you can't move, you can't breathe, and you wake up from that and you're just like, oh, that was a really awful dream and I don't want to go back in there. So what does the body do when it's on stress? So one of the things that we talk about this in holistic health all the time. We talk about physically biochemical individuality. That means every single person is biochemically different. We have different genetic template. We have different environmental influences. And the same holds for our reactions to stress. There's a lot of things that inform our responses or reactions to stress. And so they are unique to each individual person. It occurs when the demands of the environment are greater than our perceived ability to cope with them. And so a lot of that, as we know when we dive in a little deeper, does have a lot to do with our childhood and what has happened during our childhood that teaches us or has shown us how to respond or not respond to certain situations. The stress level depends on the individual's perception of the event and their ability to cope with the event, right? And the way in which these factors are handled, again, as I said, genetic, learned, mental, emotional, physical influences, and childhood can be a huge point for that. So if we look at the body on stress and the physical responses, the acute stressors are really the fight and flight one. And I've categorized the freeze and the fawn as more under the chronic stress response. Although there's really not a lot of clear delineation. There's a lot of, yin-yang movement back and forth, to be honest. So in the flight response, the physical responses are, your eyes get tunnel vision, you can get super focused, your hearing gets really sharp, you kind of perk up, your heart accelerates. Obviously, we've all experienced that. The lungs begin to breathe quickly and more shallow. The muscles become tense and can sometimes shake or tremble. The skin can become the face will flush because the capillary and the capillaries in other places will contract. You might find you get cold hands and feet. Your digestion will shut down because the energy is going to the muscles and other places where it needs it. So you can feel nausea or butterflies in your stomach. Your mind can start to race because you're trying to get through these thoughts to evaluate the situation, and also reduce perception of pain. And you often can know this when, if you've been in any kind of, an accident, when stress takes over and, you don't feel the pain right away. It's only once the hormones and the adrenaline subside that the true pain signals start to kick in. And that's a great thing. It's a protective mechanism, right? So in the flight mode, mostly the same physical responses for the fight mode. In the freeze mode, it happens when the flight or fight, need to correct that, feels impossible. The body shuts down or becomes immobile to conserve energy or survive. And oftentimes that's why this is more in the chronic category, is because you don't have the reserves there. We're going to talk a little bit about resilience. You don't have the resilience, you don't have the reserves there for the body to deal with a fight or flight response. So you become like the deer in the headlights. Your heart rate can actually slow down. Your metabolism can slow down to conserve energy. You can still have a reactive digestive system. And over the long term, there can be an increase in inflammation in the body. Physical responses for the fawn seems to be a little subset of that. Again, tension in the neck and shoulders, shallow breathing, holding the breath, and a feeling of heaviness or numbness in certain parts of the body. So if you recognize any of these in yourself, then you could definitely, know that you're dealing with a stress response, and that makes it really helpful. I say awareness is key. If you have awareness around, oh my, now I recognize that, you can actually start to take action on what you need to do about it. Okay, so the mental emotional responses on these different ones, these are always the more interesting ones in a lot of ways. The fight one, and obviously these are acute, but also in these mental emotional responses, these four categories can all be part of the chronic stress response. So if you see someone who gets triggered quite quickly and they're responding with anger, fear, irritability, over focusing on something like something that you said or something that happened, out of control, they flip a switch. They're hard, it's obviously hard for them to sleep because they're constantly on alert. And the prefrontal cortex has been overridden by emotion. They're quite reactive emotionally. In the flight, the brain narrows its focus. It focuses more on fear and anxiety, but it does become hypervigilant. But this one is really interesting, easily startled. You know, if somebody comes up behind you, or they touch you, or, you know, something like that, and you really jump, you know, that can be a stress response. I mean, it can be that somebody intentionally did that to you, but if you feel like you're doing that on a kind of regular basis, look deeper and go, okay, what am I dealing with here from before that I haven't really looked at? Again, feeling irritable, emotions tend to take over again, but it might be more emotions of sadness or upset, tears, that kind of thing. Can't think straight, which would be another way the prefrontal cortex is not kind of engaged. In the freeze, you would feel mentally hollow, empty, or lost. Again, the forebrain takes a back seat. Overwhelmed or crushed, numb or flat. Disassociate. This is a big term, especially in the freeze and fawn, where we know that term a lot. It's like you disassociate, you kind of turn it off. You physically actually can disassociate and feel like you're not in your body. Someone who's been in a very traumatic accident or things like that can often feel like they can't get back into their body, or, you know, they've had other trauma response things where they just feel like they're kind of floating up here a little bit. Loss of sense of purpose, feeling stuck, and difficulty in recalling the actual event that was the stressor. And the fawn, usually because they're the people pleaser, they end up feeling like they don't have a choice. They're trying to keep this peace. If they often will perceive something that someone says as being criticism or disapproval, so they may be over perceiving that. Stress and frustrations from needs not being met. Even though they're a people pleaser, they recognize on a deep level that their needs are not being addressed. And so it does create stress and frustration that usually ends up not being properly identified. And they lose touch with themselves, and obviously that can lead to lowered self-esteem. And so the behaviors, I'll try and run through these a little more quickly. Again, in the fight, there's more aggressive, yelling, screaming, defensive body language, and feeling restless, needing to move because there's a lot of hormones rushing through and they're not really actively doing anything to dispel those. And that's one thing about the acute stress response. If you do have a situation like that, where I use the example of being cut off on the road and you feel the hormones pumping through your body, as soon as you have an opportunity, get out, you know, go for a walk, do a little jog or a run, you know, something to really, you know, release that tension and get the hormones circulating and, you know, eliminated from your body. Hopefully drink a lot of water, that kind of thing. The flight, you tend to, you know, behaviors that you might see or you are doing or you see in others, you're running away, you're avoiding situations, you're checking out, you're distracting yourself, procrastination, or ADD. That was another new thing that I kind of was piecing together when I put this together. There's a lot more thought now that when we say we procrastinate or there's, you know, we can't focus on things, we get distracted, that it's actually a stress response behavior, which totally makes sense to me. And you retreat when you're faced with any type of challenge. So you tend to just want to avoid situations and and get away from stuff. You're not comfortable. The freeze, you're not paying attention. Again, you zone out, as I said. You're procrastinating. You tend to cower or hide. I've seen and heard of people in severe stress response situations where that's exactly what they do. They've curled up in a corner and they're not responding at all. They're not moving, and they've kind of hit a wall for sure. You numb yourself with substances to cope. You avoid places or situations that might create those triggers, or you also push others away because you're trying, again, that protective mode. And again, when I said about this deeper response of, it's called the fright, flight, or collapse, where you've actually, can't get out of bed, or you've had, absolute, like, just complete hit the wall. Again, that is an adrenal, usually a stress response, burnout. The fawn, again, I mentioned you're the people pleaser, you're in agreement, even if it's not in line with your own belief system, because you don't want to create an issue. You just want to say yes, yes, yes. You become the yes person. Submissiveness, doing things for other people. Oh yeah, okay, I can help you with that. So you're overcommitting a lot of the times. So you're sacrificing yourself for connection in some cases. Doing things that maybe you don't particularly want to do, being the type of person, i.e. changing your personality to fit into a situation in order to have connection. Again, avoiding confrontation. Oh, excessive apologizing, right? Like, I'm sorry for this, I'm sorry for that. Oh, when a lot of times, if and Canadians are known for being overly apologetic. I don't know. Are we in a chronic stress response? Maybe. Difficulty making decisions without seeking others' approval. So, you don't know. I got to check with somebody. Limited to or no personal boundaries. And that's sometimes your own personal boundaries, but you might have trouble actually seeing boundaries for other people. Like going into someone's purse or someone's email or, something like that, which is, also could be part of the fawn profile. So let's talk a little bit about the actual physical response of the stress system, which hovers around the adrenal glands. So I've got 3 diagrams here that show where they are in the body, shows what the adrenal gland actually looks like, sits on top of the kidney. I've seen it described as a fortune cookie. Okay. And it has layers to it. The main one is the adrenal cortex, which takes up 85%. Then there's the medulla. And you can see from this diagram the different things that are produced in the adrenal glands. There's many. So let's just talk briefly about the 2 main parts. So as I said, the adrenal cortex, there's corticosteroids. These are all produced from cholesterol. There's mineral corticoids, which regulate salt and water levels, potassium and sodium in particular, and androgens, which are the male sex hormones. So the adrenal medulla, which is about 15% of the gland. We have these chemicals called catecholamines, and this is where adrenaline or epinephrine and noradrenaline or norepinephrine are secreted in that acute stress response. But then again, it can get carried over if the stress continues. So I see I've always described the adrenals as like the fulcrum of the teeter-totter. Like they're the fulcrum of the body, especially if you go back to see where they sit, right in the middle of the body over the kidneys. It's that, to me, that's the hub. It's the key point. If you can keep your adrenals happy, and of course, I talk to my perimenopausal and menopausal women all the time, and then younger women and men who tend to overdo it, and they're a type A personality, and they're tending to burn out. That if you can keep your adrenals a lot happier when you transition through perimenopause and menopause, you will do so much, much easier. So the 2 main hormones from the adrenal cortex is the DHEA and cortisol. And this is like, a dual system. They can't both be operating at the same time. So that's the tricky part. And this is what we talk about when we use the phrase a biofeedback system in the body, is that, DHEA is the anabolic mother hormone. It influences more than 150 biochemical reactions throughout the brain and body. Huge. Like, just for 1 second, just say, thank you, body, because all this happens without our actual knowing. Like, this is all part of the automatic processes that happen in the body, which are phenomenal. It is a precursor to estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and cortisol, and it is a youth hormone. So it repairs, rebuilds, restores, and revitalizes. Cortisol on its own is the catabolic or breaking down hormone, and it's produced to help us cope with episodic periods of extreme stress. But too much weakens the immune system. It will increase blood sugar and insulin levels, increase blood pressure, is destructive to brain function. Over time, obviously, again, in the acute phase, it has its role, but too little can lead to overactive immune system and therefore autoimmune types of diseases. And it becomes a problem when its temporary job becomes permanent and chronic stress. So here's a little pathway. So when the stressor happens, we are triggered for the acute stress. We have the sympathomedullary pathway, and the hypothalamus activates the adrenal medulla, which is controlled by the autonomic nervous system. This is the one that releases the adrenaline and the noradrenaline into the bloodstream. And that gives you the fight or flight response. It's really those catecholamines that are active there. And it also activates the amygdala. And that's another, that's the core brain activity, the animal brain, the reptilian brain activity that also takes over in that protective mode, right? And all those things that happen in that acute response create a lot of energy, super amount of energy. So in the pituitary adrenal system, we've got the higher brain, which activates the hypothalamus, and then the hypothalamus releases corticotropin, and then that pituitary gland releases the adrenocorticotropic hormone, and then the process goes to the adrenal cortex, which then releases the cortisol, and obviously sets in motion all the things that we talked about with cortisol. So the acute stress response, the negative biofeedback loop will re-regulate the central nervous system response. Cortisol levels will drop and the system returns to normal when the stressor ends. That's the ideal scenario, right? So you can see the loop here is that we have the stress, we have the response, the threat is over, and then the parasympathetic nervous system can come back into action, the sympathetic nervous system can calm down, and we can get back into what we call re-regulated or regulated nervous system function. And then the physical release is needed if the fight or flight doesn't recur. So as I was saying, if you are finding yourself in an acute stress type of situation, you need to do some kind of physical release to dispel all that energy that's built up in your system. Really healthy and helpful thing to do to make sure that your body is disposing of that. So one thing I wanted to talk about in relation to the adrenals is, so this is the key axis, and why I talk about the adrenals being the fulcrum of the body. This is the key axis, which is the hypothalamus, which is the timekeeper. I also call it like the conductor or the composer of the orchestra. And the pituitary is like the conductor, right? The hypothalamus tells the pituitary what to do. And then the pituitary gives direction to the adrenal glands. Why this is also really important is because this axis is really key when we're also looking at thyroid dysfunction. And I find with a lot of clients and a lot of workups that are done with clients in the allopathic realm are not really adequately looking at this triad and helping women in particular with dysregulated thyroid function. Because you can also, like, blood labs and stuff only take us so far. And if you're looking at thyroid and you're looking at these particular markers, a lot of times you can show symptoms, just like you can show symptoms for low adrenal function. You can show symptoms for low thyroid function that are subclinic, what we call subclinical on a blood test, but the symptoms are there. And so then you would go, okay, we actually need to look at this. Then there's a thyroid, adrenal, pancreas triad. So again, you can see how they play off each other. We know that high cortisol levels do impact blood sugar regulation. And then we've got this ovarian adrenal thyroid or gonads adrenal thyroid axis, again, showing how the adrenals play on these other areas. So the adrenals really are so key in so many functions. So let's talk about some of the things that we see in adrenal function dysregulation. We see dizziness when you go to get up. And a lot of people are experiencing this in the last 5 years, known as POTS or post-orthostatic syndrome. And but you can have that in a mild form that happens once in a while or episodically. You can have increase or loss of skin pigment. You can have shortness of breath where you feel like you can't catch your breath. And again, the shallow breathing, cold hands and feet, that also goes along with low thyroid function. Obviously, we know insomnia, especially that wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, seems to be that cortisol time. When cortisol should be, active in the morning and increasing in the morning to actually get you started, get your metabolism up and functioning, get your energy going so you can start your day. If you're chronically, tired in the morning, that could be thyroid or it could be adrenal. Edema of extremities and low back pain, excessive urination, muscle twitches, heart palpitations. That can also be related to the electrolyte regulation as well, which again is all tied into adrenal function, and hypersensitivity to light and hair loss. Poor concentration, memory, confusion, brain fog, feelings of being scattered, inability to make decisions, inability to express anger, easily pushed around. Again, another sign of adrenal insufficiency. Irritability, nervousness, anxiety, depression, unpredictable mood swings, low self-esteem. Again, if these are happening episodically, maybe not a major concern, although it's probably a good indicator that, hey, maybe I need to take some me time. Maybe I need to take a day off, take a day away, take a day off my phone, off my computer. But if it's happening all the time, or you notice the pattern increasing, then you really need to start and do some awareness tracking and think about some long-term corrective things for this and some deeper work that you need to do. Signs. So these are physical signs that are not, they're not symptoms that someone feels. They're signs that are observable. Large pupils in normal light, or the pupil pulsates, which can be checked, obviously, by a practitioner. Dark circles or puffiness or bags under the eyes. These are often called as well allergic shiners, because when there's adrenal fatigue or exhaustion, allergies to things tend to increase, and you get those really dark circles under the eyes. And unfortunately, not surprisingly, I see this more and more in kids, which is kind of distressing. Lack of muscle development and tone. So you're not able to build muscle. Low blood pressure, chronically low blood pressure could be something which also contributes then to that dizziness when you go from lying down to standing up or sitting up. Weight gain in the face, abdomen, or chest. The legs and arms tend to remain thinner. Of course, you could also have high blood pressure, which would indicate maybe high cortisol and high adrenaline. Again, you can have both of these when there's dysregulation, or your adrenals are moving from hyperactive then to a fatigued and then into an exhaustive phase. Obviously another outcome of low adrenal function or long-term stress, diabetes, easily bruising, and discolored streaks on the abdominal area. People might think that's just stretch marks or whatever, but which they are, but they can come from a low adrenal. So this I found really interesting when I was searching around the internet for some certain things. And I came across this in an article that I was reading. And of course, this is kind of typical and rather frustrating. Is adrenal fatigue real? And this was a statement made by Harvard Health Publishing. In the allopathic system, they don't recognize it. Adrenal fatigue is theorized to occur in response to long-term stress, which causes the adrenals to produce less cortisol. This is thought to induce brain fog, low energy, depression, salty sweet cravings, weight gain, and other symptoms. Neither the Endocrinology Society nor any other medical specialties recognize adrenal fatigue as an official medical diagnosis. However, on the Foundation for Alternative and Integrative Medicine site, obviously it is recognized and it needs to be, identified, it needs to be addressed, and it is often seen as the root cause of many other conditions and diseases. As I mentioned already, blood labs do not always show the full picture. A lot of other analyses can be used to help identify that. So that's just a little visual of, sort of the mind, body, behavior, and emotions to longer term chronic stress situations. So I just want you to do a little quick check-in with yourself and just take a minute and think of, if you're feeling quite calm right now, that's awesome. But think of a time when you might be feeling a little bit stressful or when you have felt stressful. And think about where in your body do you feel it? A lot of times it can be your stomach or mid-back. It can be in your chest where you can't breathe. It could be a headache. It's really helpful to just do a check-in. And this is something you can do when you're actually feeling the stress and go, okay, where is this right now? Where is this right now? And that you can also move it by identifying where it is. So long-term impacts obviously are not great for stress and chronic stress and a buildup. As I just mentioned, headaches, fatigue, immune suppression, recurrent infections, arthritis, bursitis, muscle aches, cardiovascular risk, digestive issues, ulcers, low sex drive. Mental and emotionally, it can result in longer-term depression, anxiety, just feelings of burnout, irritability, memory problems. So when we talk about brain fog and memory issues, and even when we talk about, dementia or Alzheimer types things, is it really a manifestation of long-term stress? And also because we continue to do too much in our world, in our day, individuals. And the ones who are at higher rate for obviously getting into a little bit of deep water with chronic stress are people who are type A personalities in the color realm. They're a red, they're a doer, and they're constantly looking for the next thing. They got, too many jobs or too many obligations or, that kind of thing. Work and relationships, long-term effects like communication breakdown, where there's just so many inability to express and clearly delineate what's going on, maybe for you. Conflict, right? Because you're feeling on edge, but then also you can feel isolation and absenteeism. So obviously none of these are great in terms of life scenarios and wanting to feel balanced and healthy and happy and joyful in our life. And of course, then we do have some actual diseases of the adrenals, which is Addison's disease and Cushing's are the two main ones. There's others. Addison's is in a complete insufficiency, and Cushing's is a hypercorticolism. So, but waiting until those are diagnosed are obviously super not helpful because we want to get there before that happens. So, obviously, sources of stress in the physical realm, it could be an actual trauma, it could be an accident, it could be a super stressful episodic experience. It could be an injury, it could be surgery, it could be, because of the surgery or accident, you need some really intense medication that can cause a lot of physical stress to the body. External stressors can be job, career, workload, finances, caregiving, for older parents. A lot of people are in that sandwich generation. Major life changes, divorce, death, a move, either for career or a physical location, like you've moved to another country or another province or whatever. Obviously, technology, I can vouch for that one. Like, that's an external stressor that I would just like to sometimes extricate myself from, but that's not going to happen yet. Relationships, those can be external stressors, but we'll also talk about how those have to be, something that you need to regulate. Like, how are you, engaging in that, and how are you contributing to that? Internal, this is a big one too. Negative self-talk. Perfectionism. I was probably exhibiting some of that while I was putting this together, because I want this to be really good, and I want it to do this and this and this. So high expectations, and then social comparisons, which obviously happen when we're, oh, I saw so-and-so's presentation, that was really great. And, oh, I want to do that great. I want to do a good job. Or you're looking on social media and you're just comparing yourself to other people and what they're doing and what you're not doing. I think it's great to stay off social media, which I've been doing a lot more of lately, and I'm very happy with that. So now we get to the fun part of dealing with stress. How do we build resilience? So one of the key things is we got to have an identifier to this person. Look yourself in the mirror, to you personally. What is stress for you? It kind of goes back to that idea of the biochemical individuality. Stress is different things to different people. So this is where you need to actually do a little bit of internal work, or use your friends or family and go, what do you notice kind of triggers me, or ticks me off, or that kind of thing. That I have something that I will put in the circle when the recording goes up, and it's called a stress effects chart. And I got this years ago from a chiropractor, Dr. Turner in Toronto, who had put this together, and it could probably use a little bit of updating on some of the technology related stuff, but it's a very good indicator that you can go through and evaluate how many different types of stressors you've had, and he gives you a rating. And so, the other thing that we happen to do a lot of times is we undervalue what stress we have experienced. And then I liken it like the pole jumper, the javelin person who goes over the pole, is that, you raise that bar like half a centimeter, and then you raise it again, because we have a general adaptive ability. We are adaptive beings. So when we have stress, a lot of times these stressors build on top of one another, and the bar keeps raising. And we didn't notice that the bar was actually raising until all of a sudden the bar is way up here, and we go, oh my gosh, what happened? And then we hit that burnout. So it's really important to do some evaluations on your life and on yourself in order to, again, become aware of what you've been through, where the buildup has been. And then you can, compare it to some of the stress responses that I covered, and I'll put those in the circle group as well. And then you can begin to make some changes, and we'll talk about what that can look like. So checking how your body is against those signs and symptoms, and making lists of, okay, what do you value in your life? And what should I have boundaries around? What do I have boundaries around? What don't I have boundaries around? Personal boundaries are a really important area that a lot of times when we don't have them for ourselves, other people pick up on that. So they go, oh, give it to Sue. She'll do it. Oh, she'll do anything. Just give it to her. And then you teach people how to treat you, and it constantly continues. Make a list of the stressors. What are some kind of daily things that do push your buttons or tick you off? And a lot of that can be based on those values. You value that someone's honest with you. You value that someone shows up on time. You value that someone, treats your time with respect. All kinds of different things like that. And again, you can use the stress effects chart that I'm going to provide because it's just too much to go through in the talk. And also, what can you eliminate, and also that you will need to work on? Are there things? And I think the last 5 years has been a big wake up call. I can certainly attest to that in terms of friendships that kind of faded away, some quickly, some in slow motion. Others, work-related stuff, is that serving me? Is that serving me? Just to do a really good self-inventory. How am I spending my time? Where am I putting my energy? And self-care is not selfish. Self-care is filling your cup first. And then from your filled up cup, you can give and be of service to other people in the way that you want to be there. So, and then you need to figure out a time frame, and don't over expect yourself, a reasonable time frame to do these changes, to make these changes. I always go with the number 3. If you can do 3 things, delineate 3 things and work on that, that's great. Lifestyle habits. Obviously, there's tons of things that you've probably already heard lots about. And these are things that need to happen on a pretty consistent basis. Our nervous system likes continuity. So if we are going to re-regulate our nervous system, then we need to do something every day to address that. And even if you feel generally balanced, it's still a good idea to do something every day, checking in with yourself every day and doing something every day, whether it is some deep breathing, going for that walk, yoga, whatever it is that makes you feel like, okay, this is me time and this is my grounding and this helps bring me back to my center. So movement every day, a park, forest walk, near water, Tai Chi, walking meditation, yoga, dancing. We forget that dancing is really great and it can be really fun and de-stressing and joyful. Sleep. We could, again, do a whole talk on sleep, which we probably will at some point. But going to bed by 10 o'clock, 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. is the key reparative time in the body. When hopefully cortisol levels are coming down, DHE is now being produced and put out there, and we can do some tissue repair, muscle repair. Have a good bedtime routine. I was thinking about this the other day. It's like, well, what did we do when we were kids? Hopefully, what happened to us when we were kids, or what did we do for our kids? You give them a bath, you read them a bedtime story, you maybe put on some nice music, you tuck them in, and then what? After we get to a certain age, that doesn't happen anymore, but it should. It should continuously happen. Have a nice hot bath, get a book, read a book, get off your screens at least 1 hour before you go to bed, put on some soft music, no devices in the bedroom anywhere, preferably, or, at least in airplane mode, turn off the Wi-Fi if you can. Full darkness is best for your circadian rhythm. So, not blue or whatever blinking little lights, or if they have to be on, wearing an eye cover is helpful, an eye mask. Getting out into the community, even if you're not feeling, because of certain emotions that you might be experiencing, not feeling like you can get out there, pick something and engage in your community, engage in something to help you out with social support. Maybe it's a badminton club, maybe it's a walking club, maybe it's a knitting, maybe it's just going for one friend for tea, once a week. You got to do these things to, support connection and forge new connections too, right? When I said here, activities that you love, oftentimes we had a lot of stuff that we loved to do when we were kids. And because life gets in the way, we shove them aside. And, that's something that I've been doing is I'm revisiting all kinds of stuff. I used to love badminton and ping pong, and actually now I'm doing pickleball, which is kind of both. So it's kind of fun as I'm discovering. So meditation, breathing, obviously you can do those in a guided format by listening to something. And I've put in the CanConnect group. I really love, there's one I listen to all the time. And of course, now I can't think of the name of it. It's, Boho Beautiful. It's a young couple. They are from Vancouver Island originally, and they do these really awesome 10, 12, 15-minute, 20-minute meditations that are just perfect for either at the beginning of your day or the end of your day. So how you start your day and how you end your day is a really wonderful container for how you can really address re-regulating your nervous system and really addressing any kind of stress that might be going on for you. Obviously music, as I said, listening to classical or soft music. I know I have clients that sleep with the weather station or the news station on. Boggles my mind. I talk to them like a lot about shifting that habit and trying music or something different. And it's, old dogs, new tricks sometimes don't happen. So they don't want to give that up because it works for them. But it's like, wow, you're getting this total input of news, probably negative news, or someone chattering at you about the weather, like really mindless stuff. Let's turn it into something that's much more uplifting and do something. So if you're one of those individuals, I would really encourage you to try doing something a little bit different. If you need something on while you're sleeping, and often I put something on that stays on all night. My husband and I, we like, very soft meditation music, and it will stay on all night. And it's calming. It's not to excite or elevate. And then there's wonderful selection of therapies you can do with a professional. Some of these you can explore on your own through books or workshops or seminars. NLP, which is neuro linguistic programming, emotional freedom technique, core belief, new dimension therapy, EMDR, eye movement, something response. I forget what the D is. Anyway, those are wonderful, and there's probably a lot more that I didn't list. So lots to investigate in terms of those types of things. Whole foods, that's a no-brainer. Nutrition is key, right? We cannot be drinking coffee and having a lot of alcohol and eating a lot of sugar or fast or prepackaged foods, which is typically the fat or crap diet, and expect anything to work properly. So in terms of adrenal function, you really have to give up the coffee. Some people say to me, oh, but I only have one coffee in the morning. Okay, but is that one coffee worth it to you? If in the long term, you could get your system re-regulated a lot faster if you just cut out the coffee for 1 month and see how you can add to that. Drinking 1 month. So even start with a week and just go from there, Drinking water every day, alkaline water preferably, which is just, like distilled water is great. There's still a big, I would say debate about that, but distilled water is electrically dead water, right? Like, so I would drink distilled water at one time and I would add minerals back into it. I think our water should be alkaline and should be like life-giving. Strengthen your thyroid gland. As I showed you in those axes, the thyroid and the adrenals are very connected. And so you can work on your adrenals and also strengthen your thyroid, which is very helpful. Adaptogenic herbs, just my favorite stuff on the planet. And I recommend a tonic that has a lot of this combination in it, a lot, if not all, in it. And plus B vitamins and some, other wonderful tasty things to make it palatable, because some of these herbs are a little bit intense. So Shilajit, which comes from the Ayurvedic medicine, maca, which is really good for the hypothalamus, rhodiola and Siberian ginseng, Also meant to be balancing. The reason that these herbs are called adaptogens is because they grow in areas that are very harsh conditions. Sorry, I need some water here. Very harsh conditions, and they've adapted to their harsh environment. Hence the word adaptogens. That was actually coined by the Russians back in the 80s, the adaptogen word. Ashwagandha, rhodiola, as I mentioned, wolfberry, which is also goji berry, schizandra, and then tonic herbs, nettle. Nettle's a wonderful tonic herb, and it provides a lot of minerals, a lot of calcium, a lot of magnesium. Dandelion, in particular, dandelion greens are great in the spring. The root is great in the fall. Good for the liver, but also good for the kidneys. Corn silk, good for the nervous system. Juniper berries, parsley, great for the kidneys. Ursi as well, great for the kidneys. And hydrangea. The adrenals use a lot of vitamin C. So if you're under a lot of stress, vitamin C is a really important one. You can get up to bowel tolerance, which could be 10 grams. Bowel tolerance simply means you take incremental amounts during the day until your bowels become loose. And once they become loose and you've had a bowel movement that's not solid, then you could cut back. And obviously that can change from day to day, but you could go sort of a week at a time to see what your tolerance for maximum amounts of vitamin C. Magnesium works the same way. You can do that to bowel tolerance. And magnesium is really important as well. I didn't add that one in here. B complex, even though B5 is important, I always recommend it, a good B complex, either at 50 milligrams or 100 milligrams. And obviously getting that from your green veggies and foods. And L-tyrosine, which is an amino acid, also used a lot by the adrenal glands. So this is actually a poster that my wonderful husband found on somewhere, because he cruises the internet a little bit more than I do. And we printed this out, and we have copies of these. One is in our bedroom, one is in my office, one is in his office, I think. And I just love this, and I've given this to clients as well. And it's just simple Zen things, do one thing at a time. I'll put this in the group so you can get access to it. Do it slowly and deliberately. Do it completely. Do less. Put space between things. Develop rituals. Like anything could be a ritual. Washing dishes could be a ritual. It can be meditative. It can be calming if you pay attention. It can be you can turn it into something really fun. Designate time for certain things, like just sitting down and having a cup of tea. Devote time to sitting. Smile and serve others. Make cleaning and cooking become a meditation, as I mentioned. Think about what is necessary. Because the 4-quadrant thing, important, urgent, important, not urgent, necessary, but not important, the 4-quadrant thing that I mean. Do that with some of your activities and live simply. Whatever that means for you, you need to think about, what does living more simply mean for me? So I will fully disclose that living more simply for me, I'm in Mexico at the moment, and we are, for the first time, doing a long stretch of time in Sayulita, Mexico, to see how we love, which I'm so far so good, getting out of the rainy weather of November in Seychelles or Vancouver. So, and what we have set up here is actually very, very simple. It's almost like glamping. And I love that I don't have to wear jackets. And, so obviously that's not a thing that everybody can do, but there are other smaller things that you can do to start to reconfigure your life and make it the way that you want it, and following these Zen principles. So in closing, I want to say that stress instead of seeing stress as a negative thing, which it has a lot of negative consequences, we need to see stress as a signal. We need to see stress as, hello, I'm here, and I want you to pay attention to me because you need to make some changes. And it can highlight our needs or values or things that we need to change. It doesn't have to be negative. It can be very informative. And that part of it, when you start to reframe it that way, that's actually, in a nutshell, how we develop resiliency. Because when we recognize that we have patterns that are not life affirming and we need to change those, then we start to build the resiliency so that if we do have unexpected things that show up, then we can cope with them. And again, we can deal with them from a frame of mind of more the observer than being in it and going, oh, wow, isn't that interesting? This is happening. This is happening. But I'm just paying attention here. I'm just trying to be aware. I'm not going to get into it because as soon as I get into it, I know where that's going to take me. So it really is very much an inside job. And that I want to specifically relate to a lot of you on here who are experiencing, difficulties over the last 5 years with your health, like in some cases, severe difficulties. And it's funny how the universe provides. I'm actually reading a book. I started it about a week ago. So before I was knowing that I was doing this, but before I was actually giving this presentation. And it is all about awareness and also welcoming. What we resist persists. And if we are constantly saying, I don't want this, I don't want that's not good, I don't need to deal with that, I don't want that in my life, we're actually going to attract those things. We're giving it more, we're feeding the wolf, we're feeding that wolf, not the this is what I want. We're feeding the I don't want wolf. And so in order to do that, sometimes if we are going to truly experience life, there are going to be shitty things that happen in life. And in order to transmute those, I'd like to say, is that we actually need to welcome them. And again, this is an ongoing process for me, learning how to do that on a consistent basis. So if something negative happens, or you have a pain, or you have an injury, or you physically don't feel great, can you actually welcome that as a way of going, bring it on. Like, what can you teach me? What do I need to learn from this in order to shift it? And as I said, transmute it into something else. So in closing, I just like this, everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed unless it is faced. So thank you very much for your time.